Hello everyone and welcome back again to ThursDev. I'm your host Luke, and today we will be continuing our series on game balancing with a look at a few character balancing archetypes that are so ubiquitous in game design that they're frequently referred to as the Holy Trinity. So today, let's familiarize ourselves with the Holy Trinity of tank, DPS, and support. If you've ever played a role-playing game, especially an MMORPG, you're likely to be familiar with these terms. Sometimes they're referred to by different names, like damage dealer or assault instead of DPS, healer, utility, or specialist instead of support, warrior, or defense instead of tank, but regardless of the nomenclature, these roles have a deep-rooted place in nearly every game that we play with a cooperative element. In the odd event that you aren't immediately familiar with these concepts, these three character archetypes describe the basic roles as well as the standard baseline statistics of different character types that you find in the average multiplayer game, RPG, or any sort of game that has multiple characters that require some amount of balance. The tank is a damage sponge. Their role specifically is to be a member of a team that is up front, drawing fire from the enemy and taking the lion's share of the incoming damage so that the weaker characters can survive more easily. They're characterized by high HP and defense, offset with often slow movement speed and low damage output. They're the quintessential knight in plate mail. The DPS, or damage per second character, is designed to dish out the most damage in the team, frequently fast on their feet or just plain devastating when they release their attacks, but they are, in direct contrast with the tank, easily killed, or in the parlance of the gamer, squishy. They're the rogue or the wizard of the group in a fantasy game. The support, in contrast to these two, neither has high damage resistance nor output, but is characterized by being able to support the team with healing or buffs, perhaps debuffs to the enemy. They bring up the rear of the party and, generally speaking, will engage far less in combat as their role isn't to fight, but to keep the rest of the team fighting, the party cleric or bard. Regardless of whether the designer embraces the Holy Trinity or not, in most cases a character in a game falls into one of these archetypes. This is the byproduct of most modern combat systems being simplified down to the most simple two stats, attack and defense. Attack can be modified by things like range, attack speed, and so on, and likewise defense is often a mix of pure health as well as damage resistance, but what it ultimately boils down to is those two, attack and defense. Your tank has high relative defense, your DPS has high relative attack, and your support has neither, but is offset by having something else to contribute in defense or attack power. There's rarely ever a player archetype that both has high defense and attack relative to others as well as utility, as that would cause an imbalance. There seems to be a common movement in a number of newer games to obfuscate or get away from the standard archetype of the Holy Trinity, but regardless of attempts to do so, aside from going in completely flat, allowing all characters to be everything, they'll have to skew in one direction or the other to avoid imbalancing the power between them. Mock as some players may, some will even outright discount a game that obviously divides characters among these lines, but they exist as a balancing measure to tend to sneak into character design even outside the intent of the designer. The true wildcard in the Trinity is the support, if any. It tends to be the catch-all for anything that doesn't specifically fit into either of the two archetypes, but even support tends to follow a number of very specific tropes, as though it doesn't specifically fit into the attack or defense stat sliding scale, it instead creates a triangle with its own stat that the other two lack: utility. Utility is less tangible and frequently is significantly more difficult to convey to the casual player. Attack and defense are raw statistics. Put them down on paper or in an information screen and the player can immediately understand them. Utility is more subtle, but when executed deftly, can be one of the most useful parts of a team. The most common and perhaps once again easiest to understand utility comes in the form of healing, buffing, and debuffing abilities. For those unfamiliar, to buff means to supplement a character's attack or defense by increasing one of their stats, while debuffing is appropriately the opposite. Using these abilities for direct interaction with the team or other combatants makes it easy to digest. But then we have the other support or utility characters: pure mobility, battlefield control, and so on. Doubtless the highest difficulty, but also frequently the most impressive when used correctly. With its versatility, however, how, may you ask, can we lump utility in with attack and defense as stats like this? The reason is simple. All characters have all three. All characters have some value of dealing and receiving damage, and all characters have some amount of versatility, and the designer should be able to quantify that. Some characters are so much of a damage dealer or a tank that versatility is unimportant perhaps, but that in itself is also a quantification of it. If they mostly lean towards one, assuming the game is properly balanced, they should be more distanced from the others. Character design can even be easily balanced by looking at these three values. Say that we want to create a roster of characters for our game. In an ideally balanced game, any character can be balanced against nearly any other character as long as their total values across these three arms are the same. Let's take an abstract example using some of the monsters from Monstrosity, a game that John and I helped to create. In Monstrosity, we have a cast of creatures that are widely varied across the board, but we focus on this sort of balancing to keep any monster from being objectively too overpowered or underpowered. Let's look at a few. To illustrate, though this could be done in many ways, I'll create a triangular radar chart with 10 points each to distribute among each monster. The tank archetype is embodied by our character Torty Shell, a giant tortoise with a flamethrower strapped to his back. His special ability, the Shell Shield, allows the player to significantly reduce incoming damage, and also to draw aggro from turrets that might be attacking other characters to himself. We have a classic DPS character in our plant monster, Venus McFly, who is single-minded in the damage that she does, and though her special ability allows her to do significant amounts of damage in a line away from her at medium range, she doesn't reposition or have any significant defensive capability. Our most pure support character is Bobo Long, the Healing Dragon, the only character that has no offensive ability whatsoever within the game, instead following nearby monsters and restoring their health, and with a healing pulse ability that also heals nearby monsters in a wide radius for a large amount of health. In each case, as you can see from the graphs, the monsters have a long spike leading to a point on the triangle, but are very short otherwise. For each of these characters to feel balanced, the more we put into one area, the more we should subtract from another. And of course, you don't have to completely conform to one archetype either. The Holy Trinity, though it does traditionally detail extremes, can be used on a sliding scale to create similarly balanced middle-of-the-road characters that are balanced together with the extremes. In Monstrosity, we have all-rounder characters like our gorilla Furious George, who has the ability to do reasonable damage, tank a few hits, and also has an ability that allows him to jump over buildings for a short distance. Or the utility DPS Max Horn, who does more DPS with lower HP, but can also stun turrets briefly with his monstrous charge. These particular charts were created for the sake of this video, and aren't specifically used in the creation of our monsters, but very easily, if so motivated, a designer could use a chart like this to facilitate balance between their characters. Similarly, this sort of visualization helps the designer to understand any points where a character might be over or underpowered by as simple a task as playing, once the character is implemented, and saying, "Is our dragon really a 6 in attack?" As a flyer, even with a few hit points, he can't be targeted by ground-only turrets, so that's an instant 2 in defense, and his power allows him to reposition, so that's also a 2. Being able to one-shot a turret 2 levels above him, however, makes him at least a 7, maybe even an 8. We may need to take down his attack power to make him closer to a 6, and that was a rebalance that we recently did to our character Crispin. It could easily serve as a roadmap for the intent of a character, or in an extreme case could even have values attached that could be applied directly to stats, though attack and defense tend to each be subdivided into multiple components, and utility is frequently not even a set of stats as much as special functionality. But the best thing of all here is by using this to create an even field, you can also define characters to fill the roles that are otherwise lacking in other characters in your roster. Because multiple characters in extremes synergize well with one another, and, as they say, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Nonetheless, these three major character building components can play a valuable role in defining a well-balanced set of characters, regardless of how you decide to use this particular set of tools. And as with macro balancing, the Sid Meier method, and following the meta, having these tools in your toolkit and the wherewithal to use them are the things that help you to be a better designer. And that's it for me for today. I hope that you enjoyed today's video and that you found it interesting and maybe even educational. If you enjoyed today's video and would like to see more, today marks a full year of weekly ThursDev content, so that's at least 52 videos to watch, as well as plenty of game news analysis on our Serious Sunday segment, and just plain fun Let's Playing. You're welcome to join us in our little community of gamers who both love playing and understanding and making games. Regardless, I do hope that I'll see you again next time, subscribed or otherwise. Thank you as always for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.